Hey guys, welcome to book review 39, Travels in Siberia by In Frazier. I don't know if you can see this or not. Alright, so this is an extensive book. I think it's close to 500 pages. But what it's about, as the title would suggest, is Travels in Siberia. And In Frazier goes through 5 journeys in the country. Get to the map. I guess I should say Siberia deserves such a wide expanse because of how wide of an expanse it actually is. So it goes through 5 journeys. The first of which is, or I should say, like 3 of which are much shorter. And then the third and fourth one are quite extensive. The first one he goes on is a journey to Lake Baikal, right when Russia was opening up. I want to say maybe early 90s, I don't know. But it was the first time he had ever been to Russia, and he talks sort of about some of the complaints, the overflowing bathrooms. He actually mentioned something that kind of stuck in my head, that some woman was washing dishes in the airport bathroom, which some other Russian was complaining and saying that would only happen in Russia. And I can kind of see that. That would actually not happen anywhere else, that someone would decide to wash their dishes in the bathroom of not a small airport, but like a big, multi-airplane commercial airport. So anyway, he goes and he kind of enjoys the summer along Lake Baikal. Meets some friends up there who he would later meet on some of his later journeys. The second journey he goes on, and the one that I enjoyed the least because I thought it was so sort of off to the side, is he visits the Chuktoka Peninsula. And essentially what this is the opposite of Alaska. Sort of Alaska and Russia kiss up near the Bering Sea. And he goes and sees this area. Now, it's not that there isn't some interesting stuff in this area. Obviously, militarily, it was important because of the whole, Cold War, Soviets versus Americans thing. But much as in Nome, Alaska, it's hard to draw out what the American mindset is from some small town up in Alaska. It's kind of hard to draw out what the American mindset is from some place that's really off the map from the rest of Russia. And I know that's a little bit ironic considering this is in Siberia and everything is off the map, but it feels like almost like it's separate, like it's a separate entity. So while I enjoyed it, he talked about, some of the Soviet era military barracks around the area, some of the traditional fishing that was done in the area, salmon fishing, the stormy seas, the crafts that seaworthy crafts that one of them got sunk and killed some people. I thought in general, it's just not an area I have much more interest in, like the Trans-Siberian area, which gets me to the really interesting thing, which is the third voyage, where he travels from St. Petersburg. It's a long journey. St. Petersburg on the Baltic Sea, or whatever sea that is, all the way to Vladivostok. And oh my gosh, there's just so much. It's such a huge book. The depth of his knowledge of what happens in these areas and his observations are just amazing. Be it the dachas, the traditional sort of countryside estates that people have in European Russia, to kind of near Siberia, where these huge swamp plains of the Ob, Irwash rivers, Tobol rivers take place. some of the very early exile communities, such as Tobolsk, Ekaterinburg, to the research station south of Novosibirsk. Novosibirsk is the largest city in all of Russia, called AKADEM Gorodok, Gorodok, which is a huge research center. I find it sort of romantically tragic, research in Russia, because so much emphasis has been put on science, that there has been scientific advance. But for example, like a scientist would, maybe not quite so much anymore, but still very close to be on the cutting edge of various technologies, but at the same time hardly able to have like the electricity to run their components or even the food to feed themselves. I mean, that might be a little extreme, but you know, it's just sort of the scientist stuck in his lab dying for science, almost. But I mean, that's only one of the many, many things that he mentioned, sort of in the Near East. He also mentions a lot of the beautiful sort of cathedral towns. Obviously, the famous one being St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg is kind of a cathedral town, but just sort of the architecture in St. Petersburg. He avoids Moscow, but like Vologda, Vologda, and Velikii Ustang, Velikii. Now I know that these are just names and they don't make much sense, but he talks about, you know, just the Russian Orthodox Church and how the effects that they've had upon the society, and really sort of the what always looked like the brittle churches that are built, many of which are completely abandoned. And this is actually a thing that he brings up multiple times throughout the book, is how in the United States, and particularly how in Europe, abandoned structures that might have historical significance often are refurbished or used as tourist sites. But in most of Russia, because, you know, not like St. Petersburg, but like outland, like Siberian Russia, because it's so vast and so spread out, that a lot of these sites are simply left to crumble under the weight of time, even, you know, these beautiful structures out in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, so he crosses the Ural Mountains, as I mentioned, goes to sort of inner Siberia, you know, the swamp areas, Novosibirsk, Omsk, goes to the historical capital of Tobolsk, which, while declining in size because it's not along the Trans-Siberian Railroad, was along the old Trans-Siberian track, and now the Trans-Siberian Highway, which he actually doesn't use the Trans-Siberian Railroad. He actually hires a driver and drives all the way across, well, he doesn't personally drive, but has his driver drive him all the way across the country. Yeah, and he just mentions that, you know, this pillar on this historical site, that even though they are technically in Siberia, there was this pillar that all these exiles in the, you know, 16 through 1900s, or even in the 20th century, would pass on their way out to exile in Siberia. And what it was the marker between European Russia and Asian Russia. And all it was a marker, but people would often stop and have great breakdowns that they had to cross this line. Yeah, I've had that in my life. Let's see, what else? He talks about, I don't know, Tomsk, the Ob River. And then he starts getting into sort of, this is in his middle big journey, he starts getting into the mountain range areas of sort of more western, southern, not western, eastern. Western Russia is like old Russia, is like European Russia, and then like inner Siberia, and then like outer Siberia is like Western Russia, so like even further out. Wow, I got that wrong. Eastern Russia is even further out. Yes. So when like the settlers in the United States traveled from east to west to the Pacific, travelers in Russia, the founding and the settlement, what there is of Russia, traveled from like Moscow in the west and went east. So Western Russia is settled Russia, and Eastern Russia is unknown Russia. So they traveled from west to east. Yeah. So he starts getting into the mountain regions of the southeastern Russia. First mentioning the city of Achimsk, which they actually don't travel to, but have to take a detour around because it's one of the most polluted cities in the entire world, being the center of cement, almost all cement production for all of Russia, which is very important considering particularly during Soviet times, that everything was built out of concrete. This should also be mentioned that this is something very similar to China, and I think there's a city in Tibet that is having very similar problems now because so many structures during Maoist times, and even somewhat today, are being built out of concrete. So he says he couldn't even go into the city and just completely divert it. But 100 miles down the road, there was one of the most beautiful cities he's seen along the Yenisei River, which is one of the four main rivers along with the Ob, Lena, and Amur. Huge rivers, size of Mississippi, size of Nile, size of Amazon, that are in Russia. He goes across the city called Krasnoyarsk, I think is how you pronounce it. But it's essentially a lot like a town like you would see in German Missouri, which is the area that I'm filming this from, like Jefferson City or like St. Louis or Herman, where the city is up on a bluff top overlooking the river, having all these sort of historical churches and historical buildings overlooking the river area. And of course, the river being a huge part of commerce. This is also, the reason that there's a city here is it's sort of the cross-track of the Trans-Siberian Railway, the Trans-Siberian Road, and the Yenisei River. So yeah. And then he goes into some of the other cities around the area, some of them having to do with the Decembrists, which he mentions heavily, the Decembrists being the most famous examples of exiles, those being, I think, of 1825 when they tried to overthrow the Tsar, but failed miserably and of course were exiled and led sort of kind of picturesque but unpolitical or depoliticized lives. So not really in like the gulags, but like they were actually able to live quite well, but at least relatively quite well compared to like peasants and stuff. But had Mother Russia torn out of their heart or whatever. And so I guess the biggest city in this area is Irkutsk, which has a number of museums dedicated to that. And then he visits Lake Baikal, which he visited in his first journey. Ulan-Ude, which has the largest head of Stalin in the entire world. Chita, which I think he mentioned was the site of one of the predominant authors that led to the communist revolution. And so while this author had like a lot of influence when he wrote this book called What Is to Be Done, it was actually a terrible book, but was politically influential. Like the scripting was very didactic, very blocky, hard to read. That is not this book. This is the book that Ian Frazier is talking about. But had a lot of influence on political thought and may have been one of the books that eventually led to the communist revolution. Then he visits Chereskov, where he talks about Russian import dealers that import Japanese cars and drive them all the way across Russia to Moscow. And actually, he had to take the train for a short area because the road ends in this area. Kind of talks about some of the Chinese conflicts at this point. Some more authors that were in the area. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to go into every single detail, but it's pretty tremendous. And then eventually winds up at Vladivostok. And one of the more interesting things that happened at Vladivostok was he saw Glass Beach, which is a beach. You know, there's huge pollution problems all over Russia, not just in terms of industrial pollutants, but in terms of like personal pollutants, like bottles, cans, trash bags, household items, all sorts of stuff. But actually on Glass Beach, the people of Vladivostok, which is another just completely dirty city, found an innovative way to get rid of their glass bottles, which is what they did is people would go and drink either beer or hard alcohol on this beach, even wine, made out of glass, take the labels off, and then they were able to actually smash the glass against the ground in the area where the tides ran over. So what this did is the tides eventually break down the glass, and what's created is a multi-hued, you know, green, purple, white, pretty much any glass color, brown, gold, beach, multicolored beach that covers the area. And then kind of mentions Vladivostok. I'd say generally the greatest thing about this part of the journey is just how kind of in your bones he gets, which is very sort of a Russian way of writing. It really feels like he gets in the spirit of the Russian peoples, and even though he isn't in any one area for an extended period of time, because he's on this journey, he doesn't feel like he's merely a tourist. He really kind of, and that's part of the reason why the book is so long, is he really kind of gets in there, gets in the blood, gets in the bones. Okay, so that's his third journey. His fourth journey, which I think is a little nuts, but was actually quite interesting, was a journey he took up near the Aladon River to Yakutsk, which is the coldest, or around the coldest city. I think actually Oymyakon is the coldest city, the claim for the coldest city, but basically where it gets like negative 50 degrees in the wintertime. And he actually did this in the wintertime. But before we went up to that area, he's back in southern Russia near Lake Baikal, did some skiing there. And one of the things that actually sticks out in my mind is he met a woman who was running an aviary and, you know, like for birds. And then also like a plant place, what they call a botany something, in a greenhouse in this super cold, snowy area, and they had all these tropical plants, which, knowing just how, you know, that wouldn't be of any shock in like St. Louis or New York or Chicago or any areas like that. But considering how remote this is, it just is very, the context is striking, but also striking how, even in these remote areas, people have a will to see certain things into fruition, even if the circumstances surrounding their ability to make those things happen are very difficult. So he travels the Baikal-Amur main line, which parallels the Trans-Siberian, up to Tainya, and then takes a road paralleling the Aladon River, which is a tributary of the Lena River. Shout out, if you haven't seen it, check out The River of No Reprieve, another one of my book reviews about, I forget what the author's name is, but he takes a trip down the full length of the Lena River. So yeah, Aladon, and then he goes and he sees some gulags, and actually I mentioned earlier how these gulags are abandoned. And that's what was most striking, was that he said, even though a lot of the valuables had been stripped, so it wasn't completely in pristine condition, you know, like a lot of the copper wiring had been stripped, stoves had been stripped, anything of value had been stripped when these gulags were shut down and moved out. After all those were stripped and moved out, there was no one that had been there. And so it was eerie how recent these gulags feel. Now, it was only 70 years ago, but if you know anything about the history of the gulag, you do not want to be in one of those. Like, they're death camps. They're probably, I mean, it's hard to make a comparison, but they're probably as bad as, you know, the Holocaust labor camps. What do they call those? Like Auschwitz and stuff like that. But unlike Auschwitz, which is very moving but has been turned into a tourist site, now a very somber memorial tourist site, a lot of these gulags have been just left as is, which adds a way of being striking completely in and of itself. Finally, for his last journey, he goes a quick flight to Novosibirsk, just one city, biggest city in all of Siberia, not all of Russia, but all of Siberia. And the thing he actually mentions here is that they, with the coming in of capitalism after the fall of communism, they put a mall up, and that mall has a big observatory window that you can look out over a scenic view, which obviously, you know, that's a good idea. You can see that in the West in some shopping mall if it covered some area where there was a decent view out the window. But it was sort of like putting a square peg in a round hole, because it was so cold in Russia, and they obviously had to keep the heat on in the mall, that there were huge ice crusts, or, you know, like, not fog, but, yeah, like ice crusts. What do they call those? Frost. Huge frost crusts, not like thin, but like thick frost crusts that cover these windows so you couldn't look out. So he kind of ends his journey sitting in front of one of these windows that he can't even look out on the countryside that he's visited the entire time. A little bit of irony. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I wish I could say more about this book, other than that it's really, really good, and it really gets deep down in your bones. And it really just allows the author to kind of breathe within the spirit of Siberia and Russia. Unfortunately, there's just so much detail and information that I could be here all week talking about, you know, Mongols, or talking about, you know, the Decembrists, or talking about the Soviets, the effect they had, or the forced labor camps, or, you know, how the oil industry has affected. You know, you could just go on and on and on about Siberia. Just like, I guess just like the land in Siberia can go on and on and on, this book can go on and on and on, but in great detail and very enjoyable detail. And I don't want to be going on and on and on. So I will say Travels in Siberia by Ian Frazier. It's a really good book. Pick it up. Recommend it. All right, see you guys. I'll try to get some more of these reviews out. Bye.